For joining the Lunch and Learn session today. We are going to hear a presentation from Elizabeth Hutchinson, and Elizabeth is in her fourth school year as the Director of Student Activities. Prior to working in student activities, she was the Parent and Family Service Coordinator. Engagement and connection have played a big part in both of those roles, and so today Elizabeth will be discussing how to build a community through engagement and connection. So with that, Elizabeth, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining me. Today's topic, it's near and dear to me because it's kind of what I do all day, every day. But I did do it in Parent and Family Services. I did it when I was over there, making those connections, engaging with those parents, with those families. And we still do it as Parent Family is now housed at my office. So we're making those connections across the board. But I want to talk about how this isn't dependent upon one office today. I want to talk about how engagement, connection, and belonging, they can foster a sense of belonging among all of our students. I'm going to attempt to share screen, so bear with me for just a moment. I hope you all are seeing my slides. It should be a yellow screen. So anyway, in connection to that, we're going to talk about three things that are at the heart of every educator and staff member out there at any university across the board. Retention, recruitment, and completion numbers. Those are all vital. And we're going to talk about how today, every single one of those things can be affected by engagement and belonging, and how those are the foundations that support retention, recruitment, and completion. So before we go there, I could do this entire presentation and I could show you charts and graphs and give you numbers after numbers and statistics that back up everything that we're going to talk about today. But I want to share a little differently today. I want to share a personal story. It's personal because it's mine. And I want to share it because sometimes those lived experiences are what remind us how much this work matters. Several years ago, I attended the University of Southern Indiana, where I earned my bachelor's degree in business administration. I spent 4 years there. During those 4 years, I couldn't have told you the name of the president of the university. I couldn't have told you the name of my academic dean, my dean of students, nothing. I didn't engage. It's ironic given where I sit today, but I think it's part of what pushes me to do my job the way that I do it. I remember exactly two people from my time at USI, two people that were vitally important to my time there, two people that still to this day mean something to me. When I tell you I didn't engage, I was a commuter student. I went to class. That's what I did. And then I left. I didn't engage in campus events, campus activities, athletic events, nothing. I am an Indiana girl born and raised. Basketball will forever be near and dear to me. If you've ever seen me watch a basketball game on television or over here in the gym in person, I'm a screamer because I enjoy basketball that much. And I tell you that because I was at USI when they were a Division II national men's championship team, repeatedly. They were an amazing team, and I didn't go to any of that. I didn't do any of that. And that becomes relevant in a moment. So the first person I want to tell you about that I remember was a professor of mine. Her name was Nancy Bazal. She was my professor for a senior business communications course that was required for graduation. It was an 8-week class. And I was just so happened to be lucky enough, I got to take that class not once, but twice. The first time, I didn't give that 8-week course the attention or the dedication that it both required and deserved. The second time, I walked in on day one with a chip on my shoulder the size of Texas, and if I'm being honest, a really large amount of resentment. Out of sheer determination, or maybe stubborn pride, I turned in some of the best work I'd ever produced that second semester, probably fueled more by spite than actual motivation. But here's the part that's always stayed with me. For reasons I will never be able to explain, Nancy Bazal didn't write me off. She pushed me harder than I'd ever been pushed before. She looked past my attitude, past the frustration, and saw the potential, maybe even more potential than I saw in myself. By the time I graduated, Professor Bazal had become more than an instructor. She'd become my mentor. She became a professional reference. But more importantly, she became a connection I desperately needed 4 years before. The one person who reminded me that someone's belief in you can be the spark that ignites your own. That was a connection. It was huge. She didn't go out of her way. We didn't go have lunch together. She didn't go to events. She didn't drag me to club meetings. She just pushed me. The second person I want to tell you about, if you follow basketball at all, especially men's college basketball, you're probably going to recognize this name. He was our men's basketball coach at the time. My first semester on campus, I had to take a PE requirement. I wound up in a karate class that was more yoga than karate. And I was in the PE complex 5 days a week that semester, every week. It just so happened to be where Coach Bruce Pearl's office was. So he spent a lot of time in there himself. Coach Pearl stands out to me not because he's Bruce Pearl, not because he went on to coach a couple of Division I men's basketball teams, but because every single day that man stopped and talked to all of us that were out there. He didn't just have generic conversations. He knew who we were. He knew our names. He went out of his way to say not only good morning, but ask what was going on. Um, as I said earlier, I didn't attend athletic events. I wasn't an athlete in any way, shape, or form. And Coach Pearl knew who I was. He knew my name. He knew that I spent 2.5 years of my 4 years at USI as an undeclared major. I got real creative with what became a gen ed rec and how I could fill that. Um, it was all of those days talking to Coach Pearl that made a difference. But it was 2.5 years later, I was eating alone up in what we then called the Eagle's Nest. I was doing some homework and eating, and I heard my name from across the room. I looked up, curious as to who would be yelling at me. It was Coach Pearl. I can't tell you what the conversation was about, but I can tell you he came over and he sat down without his own lunch yet because he hadn't been through line. And he had a real conversation. He remembered who I was. He went so far as to ask me if I'd even declared a major yet. He remembered that, which I was able to tell him I finally had. And we had a whole conversation. Did he have to do that? No. Did it make a difference to me? Absolutely. The single act of connection has stuck with me for decades. And that's why I tell you this story, because it reminds us that engagement doesn't just happen at events. It happens in moments of recognition, in small gestures, in choosing to see our students as people who matter. Why? Why is a sense of belonging so important? And it's why I tell you these stories. It's because engagement is not confined to a department or to a job description. Engagement is on all of us. It happens inside and outside of classrooms. It happens with students we advise every week and with students we only pass in hallways. It happens when a faculty member learns a name, when a coach takes time to say hello, or when a staff member notices a student sitting alone and sits down beside them. These small actions create connection, and connection is what gives our students that sense of belonging. We can talk about the types of belonging. A sense of belonging is defined as a feeling that one's authentic self is accepted, respected, supported, and safe. And when we talk about belonging, it's not one single concept, it has layers. There's academic belonging. A student's confidence is in their academic abilities and their coursework. This grows when faculty intentionally connect with students and show them that they can succeed. There's social belonging. Social belonging is a student's connection with friends, peers, or student organizations. This is a key piece, but it's not the whole picture. Social belonging alone doesn't guarantee that a student feels a part of the broader campus community. Campus community belonging, the most comprehensive form, is when a student feels connected to the whole campus, socially, academically, and through meaningful relationships with faculty and staff. The challenge? The challenge that we face is we cannot call ourselves successful until every student feels that sense of campus community belonging. That kind of culture doesn't happen by accident. It requires intentional shifts from across campus, collaboration between faculty, staff, administration, and student leadership. It's built in classrooms, it's built in residence halls, in clubs and orgs, it's even built at lunch tables or outside on the patio. Recently, I've taken up a new hobby of crocheting, and I have come to enjoy the patio out here at the JSU with my crochet on my lunch break. I have found myself with a small group of students who also enjoy the same hobby and are doing the same thing. I had no idea who these students were 2 months ago. They saw me outside crocheting away, watching a podcast on my phone, chose to sit down with me. They introduced themselves, I introduced myself, and we sat out there in our little crochet circle. Wasn't planned, wasn't intentional. I was just outside enjoying the sun, and they found me. And I say that so you can keep that in mind. It doesn't always have to be an intentional, it can be an absolute accidental interaction that can change an entire environment for our students. Belonging isn't the work of one department, it's the work of an entire community. What influences belonging? The campus environment first. Students notice everything: the tone in our classrooms, the accessibility of our spaces, the attitudes of peers and staff, and the way policies are enforced. These all shape whether a campus feels inclusive or isolating. Opportunities for involvement also influence belonging. Students need intentional chances to participate, to find their niche. That could be joining a club, attending a late night event, volunteering, or leading a project. Every involvement opportunity is a doorway to connection for our students. Relationships are another way that influence belonging. Meaningful, supportive relationships with peers, with faculty, and with staff are at the core of belonging. Research shows that students who can name even one adult on campus who knows them and believes in them are far more likely to persist and to graduate. I speak volumes when I say I absolutely know that's true. The impact that brings us back to those three sets of numbers that we started with earlier: retention, recruitment, and completion. Students who feel connected to their campus stay enrolled. Students who find community share their positive experience and recruit others. Students who feel they belong graduate because they have a reason to stay and someone cheering them on. Engagement and belonging aren't extras. They are essential drivers of student success. Here at Vincennes University, our goal is to build what we proudly call the Trailblazer community, a place where every student feels known, feels valued, and feels supported. That community is built on one interaction at a time. But that kind of community doesn't happen by accident. It's something we build intentionally, one interaction, one conversation, one moment at a time. Now, I'm going to turn this over because you don't want to listen to me talk the entire time, which is 100% fair. So I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to pause for a moment and I want to hear your thoughts. When you think about your role here at Vincennes University, whether you're faculty, staff, or administration, how do you think you can actively build that sense of belonging and connection? And your ways of going about it are going to be different than mine. Your ways are going to be different dependent upon your role. Your ways are also going to be different because not everyone is me, which is probably a good thing. I can go out and I can have a cold conversation with a student. I can go out and do those things. And I know others aren't necessarily comfortable in those environments, and that's okay. But I want to hear from you. Let's talk about some ideas that you have. How can you share? How can you make those connections with our student population? Any volunteers on that front? Don't all chime in at once.
I'll jump in, Liz.
Thank you.
I think in my roles here at VU, being forward facing in the offices, students will often come in and need information, need resources. I think I've been very fortunate to have several opportunities to sit down with students and not only give them like the contact name or office, sometimes accompany the student to where they need to go, follow up with the student to be sure they were able to resolve whatever issue they had. And I think that just makes them more comfortable to come back and know that they can get answers. And fortunately, we have such a great community here at BU that students are successful when they reach out to other offices. But, sometimes it's just not knowing who do I email to unbunk my bed or unloft my bed, something as simple as that. But students remember, and I really enjoy the students. So that's one way I've been able to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roxy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Absolutely. Hi,
Oh,
Tyson.
hey, how's it going? How's it going? Hey, well, we've talked about this before. As a co-curricular activities, I think that's an important part of promoting student engagement. As an advisor of a student organization, I see students come alive in those meetings and in the events that they sort of plan. So I think if there were opportunities for students to bring the classroom and the broader campus together, or to create that space where they can take learning outside of the classroom, that may help to promote student engagement. I know I see it with the students that I work with, how they oftentimes can use what they learn in the classroom as they produce events, whether that's with the documentation, establishing budgets, and all of the things that we teach in the classroom come to life in those co-curricular situations. So I think that's something that we should probably sort of invest in, and bridge the gap between the classroom and student activities in that way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tyson. Travis, did you have something to share?
Tyson stole my thunder. So I was going to say the clubs and orgs have been really fun for me to get involved with. In my role here in financial services, I don't interact with students on a daily basis. And when I do interact them, it's usually about a topic that's not very happy, like being behind on paying their bills. So it's fun to be able to be involved in the clubs and orgs and see these young people develop. The president of the club that I work with, he has really developed over the last 2 years, and he was very shy and quiet, and now he's leading meetings, and he's planning to stick around for junior and senior years law enforcement. So we're gonna have at least 2 more years of the club.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. The young man Travis is speaking about, I can verify. He was a very quiet young man. It was hard to get 2 words out of him the first time I met him. He now not only leads the clubs. At our last awards dinner, we did some photographs, and he was literally photographing with the AP in a jujitsu pose. So he's definitely coming out of his shell, and I absolutely love that. And I love that he's sticking around for 2 more years. That's awesome. Anyone else have any other ideas they'd like to share? Or maybe an example of a way you've connected just in general with a student. Maybe it was something simple. I'll share one. I think she's still on here. I know she had logged in. My secretary, Val, she sits out here in our front office, and we have a Keurig here in our office, and we have pods of different flavors, coffee, hot chocolate, tea. And we have students that will come in regularly just to get a cup of coffee. And Val has made some wonderful connections just speaking with these students. She's learned their names. She's learned what kind of coffee it is they drink. So she has let me know more than once, hey, we're getting low on this, and so really likes that coffee. We need to get some more of that ordered. Or she's made the connection. I know one of the young men that comes in, he's an international student, and she's made that wonderful connection to speak with him and to know that he's still going to be around during breaks. When other students are able to go home, he can't. But she's made that connection. It's literally been over a Keurig. So there's really, really simple ways to do it. Sometimes it's as simple as saying hello when you're walking down the hallway. Just think about that. If you're wondering how to make that connection, if you're wondering how to do something extra, a little more, how do you go beyond your role? How do you go beyond maybe even your comfort zone. And I know that's asking a lot some days. I understand we all have our comfort zones and we are all better in certain areas, and that's okay. That's part of what makes working here and working as a part of this university so amazing, is we do all have different strengths and we can function off of that. I know for a fact, like Roxy talked about a minute ago, she's absolutely making some very wonderful connections with students. I interact with a lot of the same students she does because of clubs and organizations, and I will hear from them all the time. Well, Miss Roxy over in Humanities, she said to do this, she said to do that, and she was very helpful. She was very hands-on, and I'm getting some wonderful feedback. So they're noticing these things. They really, really are noticing. They're paying attention, and they're taking in what's being said to them and by whom and how. So just it's the simple things. When we really look at engagement, when we look at connection, it's simple. It's simplicity for them. It's making them feel seen, making them feel heard. Those are the big things to remember as we go on. I am really gonna wrap this up, and if you've ever heard me do a public speaking engagement before, you know that I am always the one they're dragging away from the stage. But today we were able to hit this and hit it well. I appreciate those of you that shared. And when we think about igniting the Trailblazer community with engagement, I want to leave you with this thought. The programs we create, the events we host, the classes we teach, they all matter. But what matters most are the connections that we're making along the way, those conversations that we're having, those just the simple connections. Those moments of belonging may seem small, but they are often what a student remembers long after graduation. If you didn't catch my personal story earlier, I graduated from USI in 2001, so that was 25 years ago. I still remember conversations that I had with Professor Bazal, with Coach Pearl. And just FYI, for those of you that are curious, if you've ever watched Bruce Pearl coach on the sidelines of a game, that is very much his personality in real life. And I still remember that 25 years later. So let's keep working together across departments, across disciplines, across every corner of this campus to make sure that every Trailblazer feels the same sense of belonging. Because when we do what we do, we don't just improve the numbers, but we change the lives of our students. So that concludes what I have today, guys. Short, sweet, and to the point. And again, if you've ever heard me speak before, you know that's usually not the case. So count your lucky stars today. Thank you for joining us today. Those of you that shared, thank you for that. I appreciate it. If you've ever got questions or an idea, I'm open to all of the above. My office is over in the PE complex. We're right across the hallway from the bowling alley. And as I tell our students, if you ever can't find me, stop, just listen. You're going to hear me long before you see me. But I'm in the hallway right across from the bowling alley. Come over, chat, or feel free to shoot us an email. I encourage everyone to use the student activities at venue email. I see it, my secretary Val sees it, and my assistant director Katie Lunsford also see it. So if one of us is busy or whatever the case may be, it's got 3 sets of eyes on it, and one of us will get back with you. So I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you take something away from today. Have a good day, everybody.